This is Suit Up Sports.
Suit Up Sports.
Where opinions are as sharp as a tailored suit. No fluff, no gimmicks, just unfiltered, hard-hitting takes on sports and a whole lot more. It's time to suit up. Now here's your host, DJ the Suit Stout.
Welcome to Suit Up Sports. I'm DJ the Suit Stout, and along with me today, Ricky Raines. Ricky, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on today.
Hey, thank you for joining us. Frank is in a celebrity golf tournament, I guess, and
that's nice.
Couldn't do the Friday after the draft, so I said, let me go see if I can find somebody who knows the draft, who studies the draft. And for those of you, and Ricky, in a second, tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter or on X. But Ricky put out like a draft guide that you literally think you would have to buy in a store. Like it really was unbelievable, the time and effort that you put into that. And it really was something that you would think you see a guy on ESPN using, as one of their guides. It was great. And so, I follow you on X and know that you know your stuff when it comes to the draft. And man, last night gets off to a start we all expected. Cam Ward going first to Tennessee Titans. And I think that was pretty much a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden the fireworks start happening, man. Jacksonville out of nowhere moves up to number 2 to take Travis Hunter. The Giants stay with Abdul Carter, which everyone thought was going to happen. But man, from that point on, you didn't know what the heck was going to happen. And go ahead.
No, you're right. I was just going to say it was really interesting how the draft started so early, right? There was a lot of talk before the draft that it started at 5 or 6 or even at the Panthers at 8. And it really started right away at 2. So that was a fun entry into the draft last night.
It was, man. And as a Panther fan, as you're watching that unfold, there was a handful of guys that I think most Panther fans thought would be a group that we would be selecting from. Yeah. Mason Graham's name over the last few days seemed like there was a chance he would be there. Jalen Walker, which is, pretty much who everyone thought we would probably end up taking. Ted McMillan was a guy that I know a lot of people like, but you didn't see him on too many mocks going to the Panthers, at least not at 8, if they maybe more of a trade down situation. But when Jalen Walker was there at 8 and you're watching the draft, is that who you thought was going to be the pick like I did?
Yeah, 100%. And it's not that I don't think Tet was not worth the 8 pick, and it's T-Mac. I apologize to him for saying Tet. It's so ingrained in my head. T-Mac or Nalo is the preferred nickname. But yeah, it's not that T-Mac isn't worth that 8th pick, in my opinion. It was more so that we've seen the Carolina Panthers in the past get enamored with prospects, right? Even Jonathan Mingo a couple years ago, he kind of like danced them into that second round selection, right?
Yeah.
And when you talk about the leadership, the intangibles, all the off-field stuff, the character, the being a defensive coordinator on the field, these are all things that I thought that Carolina really valued, almost higher than some of the on-field stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it makes a ton of sense when you see the way that board fell last night and you see the position that they're in today, where there are some very intriguing defensive prospects remaining on that board. It does make a lot of sense to go ahead and shore up another offensive weapon for Bryce Young. That offense, man, it got better last year, but it was still the 29th ranked offense. So there was still work to be done.
Yeah, and Morgan and Canales have both said that they liked the receiver room going into this draft. They were comfortable with the receiver room. Everyone knew that at some point in the draft they were going to take a receiver.
Right.
I was surprised they took Ted at 8 and T-Mac at 8. And the thing about him, the good and bad, you watch his tape and look, the dude has great hands. I think they said 10-inch hands. So the dude catches everything. Great catch radius. Great on contested balls. So all those things are exactly what you want in a number 1 receiver. You've got a short quarterback who, has had success in college or whatever with guys that either are really fast or tall. Now he's got the tall guy, at least. We hope Leggett turns out to be the fast guy. But, the thing that surprised me the most about taking him was when you hear Dan talk about wanting dogs and wanting guys who love football. The consensus on T-Mac was that that's not necessarily the case. He was on film, I guess, on a podcast in 2023 saying that he doesn't like watching film and he doesn't watch film outside of being with this wide receiver room. You hear a lot of scouts saying that they were told that he didn't practice hard unless scouts were there in attendance. So when I heard those type of things about him, that's what made me think this ain't a guy for the Panthers. Forget the fact that people say he doesn't have much separation and isn't the best route runner. But it was the character stuff that I thought would be why they wouldn't take him. And I also thought that, and you alluded to this, but in the second round, there's a lot of talent, not only on the defensive side, but there are some really good receivers that will be there when they pick at 57. So, that's what surprised me most. Now, there's some things that made me feel better after we took him when I started finding out that, when they announced that Bryce Young had secretly been working out with him, which, by the way, how does that not get leaked by somebody in this day and age, right?
Right, yeah.
But the fact that, that he had been working out with him and I guess was a huge reason why they drafted him and put his stamp of approval on it and was very excited, I guess, after they made the selection. It made me feel better when I heard that the Rams were trying to trade up to get him because the Rams are very good in the draft and they're very good at picking receivers, as we all know. So the fact that McVay and that group thought that highly of him to want to trade up and get him made me feel better. Even the Cowboys at 12, people think that's where he probably would have went if we didn't take him. And you can say whatever you want to about Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, but they have had a pretty good history at drafting wide receivers. So that made me feel better, after we took them. I was just a little, and I still am just a little worried about the a receiver who doesn't appear to love football like a Jalen Walker type of guy who there's no question about he loves football.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a loaded evaluation when you talk about the character and the drive, right? Like, does he love the game of football? Is he going to be a study, warrior who's in the film room constantly? The thing about the clip, right, from when he was 19 years old, he was on a podcast and he was eating his lunch or dinner, whatever it was, right? He was sitting there in the middle of eating a meal and he's got these younger guys asking him, a guy who's just in college, hey, man, what do you do on your free time? We don't know what the context of the question leading up to it was. I haven't found that original episode of that show. It could have just been, what do you do to spend your free time? Are you just always watching film? And he's like, nah, man, I don't watch film constantly. I'm 19. I'm out having fun, right? I think that talking to some people that do have a little bit more information about Tet, the guy does like playing football in a major way. It is important to him. And some of the things that he said in the presser last night after being selected, he was even saying, like, Larry Fitzgerald was his favorite player growing up. Larry Fitzgerald was one of those guys that did everything the right way and that had a love for football, right? You don't get to where Larry Fitzgerald got because of incredible athleticism. You got to where Larry Fitzgerald got because of incredible work ethic and dedication to the game. So that was cool for me. I think when you talk about that second round or third round talent for the wide receiver group, there's definite talent there that we showed interest in, right? Like we met with Jalen Knoll, the guy out of Iowa State. A little bit more of that slot type of build. It probably could kick out to the Z. But with Tet McMillan, I think what I'm really intrigued by is it really opens things up for Xavier Legette, who you talked about earlier. Xavier doesn't have to be pigeonholed as that X receiver. Now they have this versatility, this alignment versatility with Teteroa McMillan and Xavier Legette. And then you talk about Jalen Coker, the slot in waiting. All three of those guys have some rotational alignment versatility. And that's really important to Dave Canales in the offense. So it makes a lot of sense when you start kind of like getting underneath the surface of it. But I can totally understand, too, why there was like some trepidation from fans on that first glance of, man, we're a terrible defensive team, and we went Teteroa McMillan.
Yeah, and, that didn't bother me as much because we do have eight picks left, and this is a very deep draft when it comes to defense. And, I'll be shocked if the Panthers don't trade up in the second round tonight. I'll be shocked because I think that when you've got, guys like Mike Green on the board, or, I mean, heck, there's safeties, there's defensive ends, there's a plethora of guys out there, cornerbacks. I mean, there's a lot of good talent, but I think the main guys are not going to make it to 57. But I wasn't really bothered by the fact they went offense in the first round because what do we hear people say all the time? Oh, you got Bryce Young, but you don't give him any weapons. Well, you can't say that anymore. Dan Morgan fixed the offensive line last year. You've got 2,000-yard running backs. The tight end position still, we'll see. Tremble has gotten better every year. Sanders, for a rookie last year, he had an up and down rookie year, but he showed flashes where I think he can be a good tight end. That was the other thing that was a little surprising is they also have both tight ends sitting there at number 8. And I think most people do believe that both of those tight ends are going to be game changers, in the NFL, and seem to me to be a little less riskier than taking McMillan. but I guess they felt that, with Tremble and Sanders, they're set there. You mentioned, where McMillan can play and the other receivers the Panthers have.
Yeah.
But I saw a stat last night too, where McMillan lined up in the slot. His numbers were ridiculous. I mean, the linebackers couldn't stay with him, and his number
nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, they were really, really impressive. So you're right. They're going to have a lot of options. And Canales, listen, again, his job is offense. He knows wide receivers. He was in Seattle when they took DK Metcalf. He was in Tampa with Mike Evans. So again, if you're a Panther fan and you're questioning the pick, you got to trust that, your coach has a pretty good track record in that position as well. So let's let him do his thing.
Isn't that the kind of fun part too, that I as Panthers fans, right? And I am a Panthers fan. We have like almost this PTSD from previous coaches, previous GMs, front offices, even the scouting department. We knew scouts by name. We were calling them out for what we thought was egregious behavior. But we also sit here and say we got to give our coach grace. He was in his first season last year. This is his first time as a head coach. We all thought that he was a quarterback savant for what he did with Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. If we feel that way, and we know his history as a wide receiver coach, like you just talked about, and we know that Brad Idzik is a wide receiver coach at heart.
Yep.
And we've got all of these guys that we trust, and we love Dan Morgan. We trust him as a personnel evaluator, right?
Yep.
If all of those things are true, we have to take a beat and let this thing play out, because this pick also could look way different depending on what happens on day 2 and day 3. Because if they go and they happen to fall, very luckily into a guy like a Princely Umamayelin or a Braden Swinson, and one of these really good edge players that are young and promising, that can be a cornerstone for this defense, and then you get a good safety or maybe another corner or a nickel, you're starting to look at this and the pieces start to fit like the puzzle that Dave Canales and Dan are putting together.
Yeah, I got to believe that the next few picks for the Panthers, wherever they may lay, if they stay where they are at 57, if they trade up, because they have multiple picks in the 4th and 5th round, I got to believe that they're going to use those to move up. And I also believe that their next 2 or 3 picks are definitely going to be on the defensive side of the ball. And I think you pretty much just named the positions. It's going to be an edge, a safety, and probably a DB. Out of the guys that are available right now, and I think we would all agree Cleveland's going to stay put. They're probably going to take Shedeur Sanders, is what it sounds like, which works out great for Cleveland. There's a couple teams that I looked at that I think would be possible partners to trade up with. Cleveland has 2 picks in the 2nd round early with 33 and 36, and the Bears have 39 and 41, 39 being the pick the Panthers gave them in the Bryce Young trade. But I think both of those would make good partners to move up. I don't know what it would take for us to do that. I don't know if it would be, our 2nd round pick and our 3rd, or I don't know if we could get away with giving them one of those 4th or 5th round picks. That would be ideal. What do you think it would take for us to make a move up?
Well, so when I looked at that, I looked at those same teams, and Cleveland's a great example because they can still get their quarterback at 33, right? No fighting, no pushing to get to the front of the line. Get their quarterback. They got Macy Graham in the 1st round. Then all of a sudden you can look at 36 and say, well, we want more picks in the top 100. But what you could do to get that, maybe we can package our 2nd and our 3rd and swap with 36 and say 94. I believe it was 94 that they had as well.
Yeah.
So we take a 20 pick drop back in the 3rd and then throw in a sweetener. And that's one of those 4th or 5th round picks, right? We've got 111 and 114. If you threw in 114, which is the Johnny Mingo pick from the Dallas Cowboys, and that's what facilitated getting you up there to grab one of these, better defensive prospects, that would be a win in my book. And it would give Cleveland a little bit more flexibility to rebuild that team that that they feel like they have to do through the draft, because they've got $300 million sunk into dead weight at quarterback.
No doubt. So let's say they make that move. Let's say the Panthers are now sitting at 36. Sanders goes at 33. What guy are you just salivating and hoping he's there at 36 if you're the GM?
And so there's 2. One, I think that the Panthers have a real connection with, and that's Donovan Ezeraku, the edge player out of Boston College.
I love that kid.
Phenomenal player, right? And you talk about the off-field, the drive to be a terrific football player. He's got it. That Boston College almost ingrains that in their players, right?
No doubt.
You can't play at Boston College without a deep love for the game.
I agree.
But then I'm a huge fan and proponent of Nick Scorton, the edge out of Texas A&M, who played at Purdue the year prior. I think that he's, again, one of those, almost like we talk about Georgia defenders, where they're asked to play certain responsibilities and alignments that aren't conducive to putting up really gaudy stats. The responsibilities he was asked to do, he was asked to play a lot of 4-eye. He carried about 25 pounds more on his frame. Already shed that. He did his pro day. He looks fantastic. He's got the ideal build for a 3-4, an odd front rush backer. He's got the great arm length that Dan really loves, because that's another thing that we got to look at. We've got physical thresholds that this team typically looks for. And so when you look at some of these guys, they don't really meet that criteria, or they don't fit the system that well. But a guy like Donovan Ezeraku, Nick Scorton would be at 36 for me. Princely Uman-Mayelen and Braden Swinson are another two that I really would have on my radar if I'm the Panthers. I think that they are fantastic prospects as well. And then Jordan Birch is another guy that we had in for a 30 visit. That's the outside linebacker out of Oregon, who also began his career at South Carolina.
Yep. Yeah, you mentioned Scorton, and he did. They asked him to do a lot at Texas A&M that he didn't do at Purdue. At Purdue, he had 10 sacks, so it's not like the guy can't get to the quarterback when asked to. He did. I think both those guys would be good. I'm a big Mike Green guy. I think whoever gets him, he's going to be a steal. The off the field issues that he had,
that's the thing.
That's the thing. And, I talked to several guys that work in NFL personnel for certain teams, and teams that really do their homework and are known for drafting very well.
Right.
They cleared him as a guy they can draft. So if they're clearing him, then I would think the Panthers would clear him. But those teams haven't experienced some of the off the field stuff the Panthers had. Yeah. So it's just, somebody asked me about Siobhan Revell, the cornerback from East Carolina, who some people think, if he didn't hurt his knee, would have been the number one corner in the draft. Well, there's a chance he could be there at 57, and certainly if they move up. But I told the folks I was talking to that I just can't see Dan Morgan taking a guy in the second round again with coming off an ACL, regardless of how he looks right now and when he's working out. I just don't see him even taking that risk. It
is the tough thing with Savon is that a lot of his game was based off of his elite athleticism, and also he's 24 years old and played at ECU and only had I think like 7-8 games really on film for ECU. Yep. Before that, he was playing at a lower competition level. It's tough to invest that kind or allocate that kind of draft capital, right, into a prospect that you just don't know enough about, even on film, against the competition you'd like to, but then also add in that ACL. But you're right, 1,000%. When it comes to the physical profile and the ability, man, that guy is a baller, right? You're talking about 6'3", 200 pounds, rangy, ball hawking mentality.
Yep.
Doesn't mind getting his nose involved in tackling. That screams Panthers to me. So if he's there and they're comfortable and those medicals check out, absolutely. Mike Green was my third ranked edge rusher. Just as on film grade, right? I don't take into account anything off the field because I don't know that.
Right.
So I leave that for everybody else. I just do film evaluation. His tape is terrific. It's phenomenal. And the juice that he would bring is exactly what Carolina is missing on the outside. I am very, very weary of the fact that Carolina would take that risk, though. We had a couple guys on. We have another show, Draft Crush, that we had, draft evaluators and beat writers and stuff like that for other teams come on. And we had Devin Jackson, who writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer, he covers the Eagles. And he was saying that there were teams at the Combine when he was there that were like, he's off our board. So there are some teams that will clear him. And then there are some teams that are like, we weren't comfortable with the answers and we just can't invest in a guy like that.
Yeah, he does seem to me like a guy that you're going to see go to a team that has an established culture for a long time, that is known to take chances on guys like that because they normally work out. I mean, the Steelers, the Ravens, teams like that. Eagles, exactly.
Eagles are going to end up with Jahad Campbell and Mike Green and just run havoc on the league.
I'm also a New York Giant fan, and if that happens, it's going to make me sick to my stomach because the Eagles are good enough as it is. But you're right, that's probably what will happen. The one guy that intrigues me a lot, and I always say his name wrong, but you'll get what I mean, is Nick Emenwari. I never can pronounce his last name. Yeah. Panthers love South Carolina Gamecocks. They are very familiar with his game. Obviously, he was a combine wonder, blew everybody away at the combine. But he also was very, very productive last year on the football field for the Gamecocks. They're going to have to trade up to get him, no doubt about it. But man, if they find a way to add him now to our new rebuilt safety room, holy crap, man! I think that would be a steal if they can make that happen.
What gives me pause about Nick Emenwari is we saw Evero really struggle to figure out how to use Jeremy Chin. And
Good point.
some of the coverage limitations that Jeremy Chin had, Eamon Wari shows a lot of as well. It's the processing and the ability to open up his hips and move laterally fluidly. There's some real hesitation with him there. And I think when they brought in Trevon Merrick, the safety out of Las Vegas, I think what that signals is, and that's a guy that loves to play in the box, right? The closer he is to the line of scrimmage, the more effective he is. I think that they're looking for a guy that can play from depth. And in a Fangio-driven system like what Evero runs here in Carolina, you got to have a guy that is comfortable playing downhill and keying and reacting quickly. And that's not exactly what I saw for Eamon Wari on his tape. There are guys, though, available in the second and third rounds that fit that to a T, right? When we talk about a guy like Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame, highly productive ball hawk. Andrew Makuba, the guy he played at Clemson, and now he finished his career over at Texas. That guy has range for days. Jonas Sanker is another player that I'll name, and that's a guy that we brought in for a 30 visit. He should absolutely be in play, and he could even be a day 3 pick. So you could double dip at edge and still find him later.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think they're going to have to go DN with this first pick tonight, just because I do think in the third round it gets a little weaker. A little dicey. And with safeties, I mean, even a guy like Kevin Winston, he's a ball hawk from Penn State safety that I think he actually probably would be there at 57. I would think. Sanker, like you said, out of Virginia would be a guy that I think, and they're gonna address safety, today too. I would believe. Or double dip, like you said. Listen, if you can come out of tonight with 2 defensive ends, I don't think you're gonna hear any Panther fan complain.
There's another weird scenario here that I don't think many Panthers fans would jump at initially, just thinking of it from a conceptual standpoint. But what if they traded back, right? Like, what if there was a really good run on more offensive linemen, or maybe receivers that started flying off the board, or even corners, where we could absolutely use another corner. Trey Amos would be a terrific fit here. I think we need a nickel, and Jacob Parrish is one of my favorite players in the entire draft. He would be phenomenal here. But if this run happens on positions that we're not looking at, and all of a sudden we're 57 and 74, there's only 17 picks between our second and third. If they find someone who's willing to give up an additional third just to move up 5-6 spots, something like that, maybe we sit there and we say, okay, we'll drop back to the very end of round 2, right? Pick 63, 64. You start getting into those comp picks. Let's drop back there. Let's pick up another 85 or 90. You got 3 picks left in this 30 pick little radius, right? All of a sudden, you grab two edge rushers. You can grab a nickel corner, and then you still got your round 4 pick for your safety in Jonas Sanker. So they've got some flexibility, man. I love the position that they're in, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, what Dan did in free agency this year, where he filled a lot of the holes on defense, at least on paper, it gave the Panthers a lot of flexibility in the draft, and that's why you saw them take McMillan last night. They felt they didn't have to take a defensive end there because they feel like they filled a lot of those holes, and now they can sit back and let the draft come to them a little bit. Like I said, I'll be surprised if they don't trade up, but I wouldn't mind that scenario you just mentioned either, especially if some of these guys are falling. I think receivers we'll see tonight. Probably there'll be a run on receivers pretty quick. I think there's 4 or 5 of those receivers that I think will probably be gone before the Panthers pick, which again makes drafting McMillan. Okay. Exactly. That's fine.
It benefits us, let them make the run on those other players.
100%. And then also, like you mentioned with the offensive line, I mean, I do think the Panthers at some point will probably take a tackle, but, not in the second round, I don't think. And there are a lot of teams ahead of us that are going to they're going to come off the board quick because it's kind of a weak draft when it comes to offensive tackles. So you're right. I could see that scenario happening. Dan likes to trade back and gather picks. He's proven that. Have you heard anything? They said that the Panthers phone was ringing pretty good last night of teams that wanted to move up. And Dan was on record, saying he wanted to move up. And before I even get to my point, I got to give Dan credit. The dude had shut down the leaks, and he did a really good job of not showing his hand because first of all, every player they asked him or Canales about, they loved the player. They complimented him to the extreme, regardless of who the player was.
Yep.
And they really did do a good job of not showing their hand. He had a great poker face. And even with the trade down stuff, people were all over him yesterday saying that, he's saying he's going to take less than, good, all that crap. And you got to give Dan credit for that, whether you like the pick or not. But back to my point, and now I don't even remember what my point was. I was slapping Dan on the back, but
he earned it. He earned the accolades. I'm glad you did that because I was criticizing him, man. I was criticizing him. I hated that idea of saying, "Look, we'll take pennies on the dollar." Right? To move back.
Yep.
You're killing your leverage, man. And like for a guy who I think Dan is fighting for his job here too.
100%.
I think he's got to have a knockout draft. I think he's got to show some progress on the field with his team. And so for him to say, hey, look, we'll give up our leverage just to gain some extra picks. I was nervous, man.
Yeah.
But you nailed it. The poker face that he showed and his ability to kind of keep things close to the vest for one of the first times in the Panthers history in a while, right?
Yep.
I mean, we could literally write down who we thought they were going to pick last year, and you probably hit about 80% of them. Just because they told you. They came out and said Xavier Legette. They were like, yeah, man, coach told me he was going to take me and he wanted me to play Mike Evans' role, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they did a good job of at least keeping these things secret this year.
They did. And you mentioned the draft last year and Dan fighting for his job. What players? So, you look at last year's draft, obviously Xavier Legette's the key. He again had an up and down rookie year, was really good in the red zone. Dropped a lot of balls that we didn't see him drop in college.
Right.
No one questions, and this is the thing that I feel good about Legette with. No one questions his work ethic. No one questions, he's a great teammate. And Thielen's kind of taking him under his wing. So he's the key to that draft. Obviously, he's got to turn out to be a very good receiver. So it's a huge year for him, obviously.
Yep.
Brooks, we're not going to see this year. And that's fine. Let him get that knee ready. And hopefully maybe he comes back, next year. But what players from last year's draft do you expect to really step up this year and hopefully earn, where they were drafted in last year's draft?
Well, it's a shame that Jonathan Brooks is injured again. I was a huge fan of Jonathan Brooks, and I still think that guy's got legitimate, like NFL starter, top 10 type of talent.
I agree.
He's a difference maker. I hope that he comes back and he retains that athleticism. But if it's not going to be Jonathan Brooks that makes a big difference out of that class, and Xavier Legette's kind of the obvious one, right? I look at Trevin Wallace, that third-round pick, and you look at it and you say, Dan Morgan was a linebacker. You kind of trust that he has the ability to put eyes on a prospect and know if he's got the goods. I also think that Trevin might have been a bit of a contingency plan for Edgerrin Cooper, who I think was their real desired target there. He went to Green Bay, few picks ahead of us. I think if Trevin could take a step, then you're going to feel a whole lot better about the departure of Shaq Thompson. My concern with Trevin is can he get the processing to match the speed and the physical ability that he has? Because his feet and his body move a lot faster than his brain, at least in that first year. And that's regular. I don't want to make that seem like alarmist. That is a fairly typical thing for a rookie to come in and have that. But it was also on his tape a little bit at Kentucky. So you're counting on these coaches who really do, man. They hang their hat on being this developmental staff, right? So you're counting on them to do their job and get the most out of this elite athlete. If that doesn't happen, then you're looking at the reason why they signed Christian Roseboom.
Yeah, and one thing about Wallace was, first of all, he got thrown into the starting role a lot quicker than the team would ever have hoped to when Shaq got hurt, he got thrown in there. And I think if you had to give the guy a grade, I think I gave him a B- or a C for a rookie getting thrown in. You're right. The processing at times wasn't there, but that is not abnormal for a rookie linebacker, especially a guy that was in there having to make a lot of the calls on defense. But I do think we'll see him take a step up. I also think that linebacker is a position that's going to be addressed in the draft as well. The middle linebacker spot is kind of weak in this year's draft. They're going to go quick, but Schlesinger or Barton from Oklahoma, whether it be or Clemson, there are a few guys I think that probably would be there. Schlesinger I think is going to probably go top half of the second round, but I think you could address it in the third if we keep that pick. But do you expect linebacker to be something that they go after the next couple of days?
I do, because I think even if you are comfortable, even if they have faith, right, in Trevin Wallace, let's say that they do and that they see him as their answer for the long-term solution, you still only had 3 linebackers on the roster with Christian Roseboom, Josie Jewell, and Trevin Wallace. And Josie Jewell dealt with injuries last year. We saw that when Trevin was asked to put on the green dot, right, not just start, but be the communicator on that defense, that's really where he was overwhelmed. If you can take that part away, at least just while he's developing, take that part away and let him play instinctually and a little bit more reactive, I think you could see what the promise is for him. But when you're asking him to direct the entire symphony, I mean, look, let the guy play his instrument, right? He doesn't need to be telling everyone else how to hit their notes. Let him do his thing. But I think from a depth standpoint, you got to sign somebody. You mentioned the Oklahoma linebacker, Danny Stutzman is a guy that I like a lot. He's a downhill thumper, right? Old school type of player. You don't really want him in coverage, but that's where Trevin's supposed to be terrific. So that works out. Danny Stutzman is a guy that I would look at. Schlesinger, I think, is on the Panthers' radar, and that would be a pick that maybe could surprise some people at 57. But if he falls to 57, I think that's a pick that they might be enticed by, because you got Luke Kuechly that signed off and said he looked like a really good linebacker, right? And this is the guy that has the range. He's got the physical ability. He's great in coverage. He could be used as a weapon in blitz packages as well. You've seen him create pressure. So I think that linebacker is a position that they'll address, and it could be as early as round 2.
Well, if he's there at 57, and again, assuming that some of the other guys we talked about are not, then I would love that pick. It's funny when you watch his tape. He kind of reminds you of Dan Morgan. I mean, he's that bulldog. He's fast side to side. And like you said, he didn't have to come off the field. He's good in coverage. He can blitz. So if he is there at 57, then I would be totally fine with them making the pick. Let's go back to last year's draft. We talked about, Wallace in the 3rd round. And then we mentioned Sanders earlier. Had some games last year where he looked great. He had some games last year where he didn't even look like he was involved, not necessarily because of him, just because it wasn't in the game plan for whatever reason. Had the concussion, I believe, against Kansas City. So that obviously was a little roadblock. But, man, at times he showed flashes of a big dude that can run and is tough. Yeah.
For Sanders, with me, I don't think he's ever going to be the elite athlete that the dominating tight ends are, right? He doesn't have that to his game. But what he can do is he could be a weapon in the seams, going up the middle, being a vertical stretch. He's a possession guy as well. So the after the catch wasn't where he really made his hay at Texas. It's probably not where he makes it here. But being an actual passing threat is something that Tommy Tremble, you're right, he's improved, but Tommy never took that step as a receiver. Tommy, I think, is more solid as a blocker, and that's the thing that Jatavian's going to have to improve on as well if he wants to stay on the field. That's where this Panthers team still does need to invest in the tight end position, in my opinion, is if they want to do these jumbo packages, if they want to run out of 12 personnel. Dave Canales even has a 22 package that he likes to run out of pony. If he wants to be able to do that, man, he's got to have guys that can block from that inside alignment, right? That tethered alignment. And that's not Jatavian. It can be Tommy. But I think if you could find a true road grading blocking tight end, then Jatavian actually gets a better profile for his offensive skills. You let him focus and be the, for lack of a better term, the Mark Andrews, right, of this offense, where he's out running routes and he's your intermediate threat. Mark Andrews isn't a guy that's giving you a bunch of yards after the catch anymore at this point of his career either.
Right.
He's not a vertical speed threat, which Jatavian is not either. But he's got enough to threaten the defense and make you account for it.
Yeah, and in the red zone, I mean, listen, you look at what this offense can do in the red zone now. When you look at Sanders, you look at McMillan, 6'5", you look at Leggett, who I think had all 4 of his touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, last year in the red zone. I know at least 3 of you've got Leggett, you've got Jalen Coker, who's a big body, and then you've got 2 running backs that are both big, guys that, I mean, their red zone offense next year could be dangerous.
They're trying to bully ball it, right? They're going back to old school football. They say, we want to be bigger and stronger than you. And the fun part is that Tet isn't slow, or T-Mac. I got to get over that, huh?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
It's not going to happen, man.
I won't get rid of it.
I'm stuck.
But
no, T-Mac is not slow either. Like he's almost 6'5". The guy is a legitimate 6'4" and some change. and he's a very fluid athlete. He can move a whole lot better. Honestly, he moves better on a agility standpoint, moving laterally, than Xavier Legette did. And Xavier Legette is the speed guy that everyone thinks about, but he needs a ramp up. Like T-Mac, he could go. The minute he gets the ball, he can turn it up a gear, right?
Yeah.
But when you talk about this red zone ability, it's kind of funny to me. We gave David Tepper absolute hell when he said the thing about Bryce Young being a point guard and distributing the ball with routes, which was a really stupid thing to say. I'm not trying to say that it wasn't.
Right.
But they're building a basketball team. Like they got jump ball guys. They got power forwards that are out there playing. And they say, if we can get our run game to get us within 20 yards of that painted area, man, how are you going to defend guys that got 40-inch verticals that are 6'4" and that have baseball gloves as hands, right?
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to watch. And with Bryce accuracy and those big targets, man, they should be dangerous in the red zone this year, at least hopefully. It appears they will be on paper. Back to the defensive side real quick, and I know I'm jumping around, but we were talking about linebackers. One of the other things that I think will help Wallace this year and all the linebackers was, not having Derek Brown last year obviously was a huge loss. Our linebackers were just getting drilled. There was almost like there was nobody in front of them. Well, this year with Brown and Wharton and Robinson and some of these big bodies that we've brought in, it should allow the linebackers to play a lot more free and be able to really go side to side, make plays, where last year they had a lineman on them immediately.
I think that people underestimate sometimes how connected all of these positions are, right?
Right.
One of the main things you got to do for your linebackers is keep them clean.
Yep.
You can't do much reading and reacting and playing with instincts if you've got guys with their hands and body in your face immediately. So keeping them clean at that second level is going to absolutely make a difference. Derek Brown being back will be the obvious answer there. But the signing of Bobby Brown also is tremendous because Bobby Brown was there with the Rams. And when Christian Roseboom had his career year last year, guess who was in front of him on a lot of those snaps? It was Bobby Brown, man. And that's a space eater who's got long arms and he's got a little bit of shake to him too. I think he might be a better pass rusher than he got credit for. And he might get deployed a little bit differently here. But when you take an A'Shawn Robinson, Bobby Brown, and then a Derek Brown, all three really big guys, then add in a Tershawn Wharton, right? Who can kind of give you that interior pass rush. They're going to build out these platoons. That is their prerogative. It's what they have said they want to do. And it makes a ton of sense because then you're going to have to actually account for that defensive front four where no team had to do that with Carolina last year, man. If we weren't sending pressure, we weren't getting any kind of noise.
Exactly. And that's going to help the DBs as well, because with when you get pressure with the front, all you have to do is watch the Super Bowl. When you can get pressure with the front four, and it's been that way forever. When you get pressure with your front four, it makes the secondary a lot better.
The Eagles didn't send a single extra defender that entire Super Bowl, and they made Pat Mahomes' life hell. Like,
they sure did. They did.
I want that here in Carolina, man.
Yeah, no doubt. And, Bobby Brown, like you said, great year last year. And when you hear some of the guys on the Rams defense talk about that kid when he signed with the Panthers, you heard all of them to a man say that kid's best years are still coming. Like that kid works hard. He improves. He's a great kid in the locker room. So, he's kind of the forgotten guy. I think sometimes when we talk about the free agents, you see Wharton and his sack numbers and those things,
but contract, right?
And exactly. But Brown's a guy that I think Panther fans are going to be pretty familiar with when we get the season rocking. I
love him, man. That was my favorite signing, to be completely honest. He was a high recruit coming out of college or coming out of high school. He went and played at Texas A&M, and then he was really good there. And then when he got drafted, I think he had a couple of injuries on the resume that kind of pushed him back a little bit. But man, you talk about a guy with a pedigree. He's got it. This isn't just some guy who's like, oh, what a great pull yourself up by the bootstrap story. This guy is like, he's built too.
100%.
He'll remind you of Derek Brown. There's a guy in this draft that he reminds me of a little bit, and that's Alfred Collins, the defensive tackle out of Texas.
Yeah, I like him.
Really long arms, and he can play the nose. He's probably got a little untapped potential as a rusher. It's interesting, man. I think that Dan Morgan knows what he's doing, and it sounds crazy to say that about a Panthers front office, but they got an idea.
No, I agree with you. So far, I've been impressed. Like I said, when he rebuilt the offensive line last year, which was perennially one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and when he rebuilt that, and of course, there's always people are going to have to come up with something. Oh, you're overpaying. Well, he had to overpay because he had to overpay him. He had to get him. And this year he's doing the same thing with the defense. And I think Dan's done a really good job so far. Now the draft from this past season obviously is going to have, Leggette's going to have to be a player, and McMillan's going to have to be a player, right? Yes. And we'll see what he does the rest of the draft. But I also like the fact that he's got 8 picks left if he chooses to keep them all.
Right.
And, you're not going to hit every one of them. So if he can find 3 players out of those guys, then he's doing well.
Cooking. That's right.
Yeah.
And the thing about saying overpaying the players, right? This is always something that trips me out, man. And I don't know if you'll agree with this or not. A, the money's not coming out of my pocket, so I don't really
exactly.
care how much they're getting paid, right? And B, it's only overpaying if they underperform.
Yeah.
If they play good football and they do what you're asking them to do when they come in here, you're paying them what they're supposed to be paid. You're only overpaying a guy who doesn't play well.
Yeah, Frank and I argue over that all the time because I said, it's not your money. What do you care?
Yeah.
I trust that Tillis is going to do the math and make sure that puzzle all works together.
Yeah.
And I don't care about it. This Tepper's money. It's not mine. So
and that's what Tillis is getting paid for, right?
100%. So let them figure it out. Like you said, the only way that anyone's going to care and say it's overpaid is if the dude doesn't perform. 100%. And that's the way it should be, right? I mean,
the guy could be making $4 million. DJ Johnson was a 3rd round pick. He's only making $4 or $5 million a year, and he's getting overpaid because he's not very good.
Right.
But if he was getting paid, I don't know, 500,000, you would look at it and say, hey, he can set the edge pretty damn well, right?
Yeah, 100%. And he actually, speaking to him, he actually showed some flashes last year. So maybe we see some improvement from him. Who knows? Because he's another guy that's got all the athletic ability.
That's right.
Just has to put it together. So let's move into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. Give us some guys and some positions that you really like, that you'd love to see, that you think would be good fits with the Panthers.
Well, so we talked a little bit about a couple of them. I'll re-emphasize those guys first, and that's Jacob Harris, the cornerback out of Kansas State. I think that he's a tremendous nickel prospect. He played a lot of outside. He reminds me of Trent McDuffie, like almost carbon copy, to be completely honest. He's about 3/4 of an inch shorter, longer arms, but a physical press corner that has a great feel for zone. I think if you could shore up our nickel, I know that a lot of people like Shaw Smith-Wade, and he was asked to do some things that maybe he didn't need to be asked to do either, and that's partially because Dane Jackson didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you could first bring some competition to that position, I think would be tremendous. Any kind of competition you could bring for a roster that was the bottom of the league on defense, you're going to get the best out of whoever it is that's going to be on that field. Yep. You can't just hand somebody an opportunity in this situation. So I think that Jacob Harris would be on my board. Jonas Sanker would be the other one that I would have on my board. Q Robinson is a situational pass rusher out of Alabama who doesn't have a whole ton of reps under his belt, but you talk about the athletic flashes. 6'4", 250-ish pounds, got the long arms. He's got the first step, that burst, that get off, man. It is what we are lacking severely. It rivals James Pearson away because of the way that he knifes through the line. He's a much more finesse than he is physical. Shows a little bit of strength with the long arm to be able to play that way. But I think that that's going to be a developmental player that could be a DPR when he first comes in. Another edge rusher that I'll talk about that I love, I don't know how familiar you are with him, Ashton Gelati, the edge rusher out of Louisville. Yeah. Man, that dude plays with his hair on fire.
Sure
I absolutely love him. Slightly undersized with the arms, but he's got a stout frame, about 275 pounds, 270-ish pounds, 6'3". I think that he could be a terrific player. David Walker out of Central Arkansas. That's my sleeper, man. I absolutely.
Really? I'm going to write that. That one I'm not familiar with. So
man,
I'm going to write this one down.
If you want to see some of the best tape you've ever seen. Now, David Walker played at Central Arkansas. So there's the rub with him, right?
Yeah.
And he's pushing 25. He's going to be like 24 and a half years old. But if you can get him either at the back of round 3 or at the beginning of round 4, which is right in our vicinity, right? Like that's right in our grasp. Go watch his film, man. You are going to have a ball watching this guy play.
Really?
He is a dominating edge player. He will bulldoze. I mean, absolutely. His bull rush is ridiculous. And he makes tackles look silly, man. Like, you feel bad for some of these guys on tape. You're just like, dude, I hope he doesn't have a wife and kid at home because it's going to be tough to explain what happened to him today.
How big is he?
He's about 6'2", 260 pounds.
Wow.
Shorter arms. My comp for him is Brandon Graham. He plays very similarly to Brandon Graham. And I'm going to tell you, man, I know that might be a slight outlier Maybe he's like 6'1", 6'1.5". But that might be a slight outlier, Brandon Graham. Maybe that's not your prototypical success story at the NFL. But man, this guy plays with the attitude and the work ethic and the just non-stop relentless motor that you saw with Brandon Graham to get to where he is. So if you got that option, and we beggars can't be choosers, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
If you can get a guy that brings the juice to the pass rush, I think you bring him in.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Graham because a guy that used to work for me and also play for the Panthers, Brenson Buckner, great defensive lineman, very, very, very smart football guy, has coached in the NFL for years, but he was asked to help work with Graham during the pre-draft stuff. Before, and so Buck was like, dude, I'm telling you, this dude, everybody wants to sit here and say he's not tall enough, or I'm just telling you, this dude's going to be a player, and he wasn't wrong. So if David Walker could turn out to be a Graham type of guy, then the Panthers, they could do a lot worse.
You and I were talking as a Charlotte native. I grew up when I was watching the Charlotte Hornets, right?
Oh yeah,
and Muggsy Bogues was a thing when I was growing up. That was my guy. I had the VHS tape of Can't Tell Me No, right? I was a kid. I'd throw that thing in the big old box TV and I'd watch it growing up. and that's the attitude, though, that I think can absolutely overcome outlier physical measurements.
Yeah.
If you have that internal fire, and I'm not saying that it's the only thing you need, because you got to have some physical talent and some athleticism too, right?
Yeah.
But if you've got that mentality of you can't tell me that I can't do something and I can prove to you that you can, that's going to take you a long way, man. And I do think that this Carolina Panthers team values that kind of mentality a lot too. So would they take a chance on a guy that has a different physical build than what they typically look at? I think so. And Dan Morgan even alluded to that this year, right? We heard him say it multiple times. We've got these big, tall, long edge players now. We got DJ Wanham. We got Pat Jones this year. We got Jadeveon Clowney. We got DJ Johnson. We got edge setters, man. He was like, that allows us to look at some different archetypes of players. Maybe that's the bendy, shorter speed guys.
Yeah. And you mentioned Gillette from Louisville. What's his size again?
He's about 6'3", 265. Sub 32-inch arms, I believe, like 31 7/8. I think I'd have to pull up my guide. That's the problem, man. When you do 203 film evaluations, oh man, it is really difficult to keep them all crystal clear in your head, right?
Listen, excuse me, I'm pretty well versed in this stuff, but to remember everybody that you do and all the measurables, man, I don't have that skill. I have to have it in front of me for a lot of these guys, and so the fact that you can rattle off what you do is pretty impressive.
My wife tells me all the time she wishes that I had that ability to do that with something other than football.
Well, we might, us guys are very selective in where we use our skills. That's for sure. That's right. Gillette and when I watched him on film, now that you mentioned Brandon Graham, he actually kind of has that game a little bit too. I think, looks like he's a great motor, big heart. And, you mentioned, how much heart and fire carries a player. And you're right. Obviously the athleticism has to be there, but Frank and I talk about this a lot, especially when we're talking about the transfer portal and college football, where, loyalty and heart is not the same as it used to be when guys like us were growing up. And I'm not trying to be the guy that walked uphill both ways to school. And then, I'm not trying to be that guy, but literally the kids and players these days, you're going to find a lot more without that heart and fire, especially once they get millions, than you find with it. So, I do think that a guy like Dan Morgan and Dave Canales put a premium on that because they understand that's what wins games. They may not be the fastest, they may not be the biggest, but if they're pretty close and they've got heart, then you'll take those guys and go to war every day.
That's right. And for Ashton Gelati, I was able to look up his stuff real quick. So at the combine, he measured in at 31 7/8-inch arms. But, at the combine, they also said that there was about a half-inch issue this year with all measurements, that they were short. So you look at it, and it's sub 33, which is still suboptimal, right? But it's not terrible. 6'2" and 5'8", 264 pounds, ran a 4.63 40. 24 reps on the bench of 225 pounds. His 3-cone drill was elite, under 7 seconds, 6.94 seconds, shuttle of 4.3. I mean, all of that. They do the relative athletic score on the Math Bomb. Kent Lee Plate does that thing where it kind of compares the prospects, all their combine and testing measurements and their physical measurements and stuff to all of the other players in those positions. And it tells you, relatively athletically speaking, where do they rank percentile wise, right? And it gives a grade through 1 to 10. He had a 9.74. on
Wow.
that.
Wow.
I mean, that's a really impressive score. His 24 production, he was able to kind of rush a little bit more freely. Louisville changed up their defense 2 years ago, and he kind of got some more freedom to do things and line up outside a little bit wider. He had a 20.9% pass rush win clip. He had 41 hurries, 11 quarterback hits, 5 sacks last year, and only an 11.9 missed tackle percentage, which still sounds like a lot. But when you look at the rest of these players, they were pushing 17, 18, 19% of missed tackles. This guy he's a stout power profile type of player. My comp to him was Tuli Paluto, the player out of UCLA last year. Really good, stout run defender and pass rusher. I think that he could be a tremendous steal in the 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think he'd be there in the 3rd round for sure, don't you?
Absolutely. 3rd. It could even be the 4th potentially.
Yeah.
But I think the 3rd would be a pretty safe place if you wanted to take a chance on maybe a safety in the 2nd, or that scenario you and I just spoke about earlier in the show. Maybe this is the double dip opportunity. If you get a guy like Princely Umamayelin that falls into your lap at 57, I wouldn't look that gift horse in the mouth. I would take him.
Yeah.
I'd bring him in immediately. But then if Ashton Gelati falls into your lap at 74, look, I wouldn't get cute, man. I would load up. You need help there. So take the good guys if they're there.
No doubt, and it's been a long time since the Panthers have had 2 guys that can rush the passer. Brian Burns, was solid, obviously, but it's been a minute. And listen, you look down south about 4 hours, and you see what the Atlanta Falcons did last night when they double dipped on defense and edge. And listen, Pierce on tape, there's a lot of things that you can pick apart, but he is fast. He's great at getting to the quarterback.
Yep.
A lot of analysts had him as their one of the top 2 defensive ends in the draft. There was some off the field stuff with him as well. That I guess some people weren't comfortable with. But yeah, the Falcons double dipped, and their defense was not as bad as ours. It was not pretty, but it wasn't as bad as ours. So
I used to make the joke all the time on the show that I'm a host of, Panthers on Tap. I would talk about it, and I would say anytime that we did the game preview, right, for playing up against Atlanta, I would say this is one of the only times that I get to say this, but their pass rush is just as bad as ours. Like they ranked right there next to us, and you nailed it. They had a very intentional approach last night.
Yeah.
Some people will disagree entirely with what they gave up to move back up and get James Pierce Jr., but James Pierce Jr. was my 2nd ranked edge rusher on film. I think that he's got the frame to add more weight. Right. I don't think that he has to play at 240, 245. I think he could easily play in the 255 range. He's got that kind of build to put that extra mass on. But that first step, man, that he has it's lethal. You talk about Abdul Carter being so sharp off the snap. James Pierce might have had him beat in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's a skill that you don't really teach, man. That's an innate type of skill. And then Jalen Walker, they just brought a lot of juice, man. And that's a scary prospect if you're a NFC South fan.
Yeah, you always pay attention to your own draft, obviously, but when you look at the teams in your conference, last night was one where I went, man, because I hate the Falcons, but they got 2 dogs that we're gonna have to see twice a year. Yep. The Saints, with obviously what they did, they don't worry me this year anyway. Who knows if they're gonna do it quarterback? Right. I'm sure. I think they've got 2 second-round picks, if I'm not mistaken, but I know they're going to they'll take a quarterback. I got to believe with one of those guys. The interesting name to watch tonight, at least for if you're not a Panther fan, because we wouldn't take him, but Milrose sitting out there, and man, there's teams that need a quarterback. There's teams that like him a lot. The Steelers being one, the Saints, the Jets. I've heard. It'll be interesting to see where he goes. I got to believe he'll be in the top half of the 2nd round. Somebody's going to go get him. Could Cleveland take him instead of Shedeur Sanders? Possibly. And if that happens, my God, Dion's gonna come unglued. But listen, when you hear scouts that have been doing this for 20, 30 years say that he's the best running quarterback they've ever seen with the strength of a Cam Newton and the speed of a Lamar Jackson, obviously the accuracy needs work. And the good thing for him would be wherever he goes, he's not going to play this year. He's going to sit and watch the whole year go by and learn, which is why I think Dart to the Giants was a great choice for them to trade back up. Whether you like Dart or not, at least they went and got a young guy that can sit and not get forced in, because we've seen in the past, there's not many rookie quarterbacks that can, get in there and really play well the first year, and it hurts. I mean, listen, I still think the Panthers, as I know, I wouldn't have been the sexy move, but I would have let Dalton play Bryce's rookie year. I would, and I think that did end up hurting him because I think he lost his confidence and took a while to get it back, and obviously he did. But what do you think about Milroe? You think he's got a chance to be a good quarterback, or does the accuracy just worry you?
I just think that the tools are great enough that you take the chance on him. It's what you said. Immediately he comes in and he gives you a tremendous threat with his legs. I mean, tremendous. And I there are flashes too on his tape of high level throws, being able to layer it over all three levels. I mean, layered throws are what scouts and NFL teams really look for, right? That ability to have the different trajectory, the different speeds. He doesn't just have a fastball, right? Like when I looked at somebody like Will Levis, that guy had one speed. He was like, the Charlie Sheen of quarterbacks. One speed go, right? He was made of tiger blood. All he wanted to do was throw it as hard as he can, right? He was Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. He said, I'm going to throw it over that mountain. But the problem is his receivers can't catch the ball if you throw it over a mountain or if you throw it 500 miles an hour every single time. Yeah. Jalen Milroe, he had accuracy issues which was more consistency of his lower half. Connecting his lower half with his body up top was really where I saw the fundamental breakdown. And then the mental part of it, he didn't see pressure very well. I don't know that that's something where you sit down and you watch the game. I mean, man, we just saw Bryce Young, who was supposed to be the most NFL ready, unflappable, instant processing quarterback, get completely flapped, for a lack of a better word, and lose his confidence, as you spoke about. And then to build a quarterback back up is difficult, man. To build anything back up is difficult, right? But a quarterback who could potentially have a more fragile mental ability to say, I got to forget about how bad that was and how I was the first overall pick that everyone traded all this stuff for. And now the city that drafted me, half of the fans hate me. That's a difficult hill to climb. Yeah. We're lucky that he got over that. That's very fortunate. He's a very strong, his mental fortitude is extremely durable. And I'm grateful for that. But for Jalen Milroe, you nailed it. You let him sit, man. Let him see the game. Let him see other people having those bullets flying at them, but not panicking. He needs to be able to trust what's in front of him with that offensive line. And if you can get him to do that while having the ability to work with him one-on-one, there's not a quarterback in this draft outside of Cam Ward that has the tools you could point to and say, that's a franchise-changing quarterback.
No doubt. And speaking of quarterbacks, do you think the Panthers on maybe day 3, I know in some mocks I've seen them, and I know they interviewed the quarterback from Houston. I know they've been tied to the quarterback from Missouri. Do you think in round 4 or 5, maybe they take one just to have another young quarterback on the, in the quarterback room with Dalton obviously getting older, not to take Bryce's place by any stretch of the imagination, but just to have another young quarterback that they can develop and eventually maybe trade like we just saw the Patriots do with Milton. Right. You think they take one, or you think they don't even waste a spot on a QB?
I would be shocked. Yeah. I would be shocked if they take one. The only way that I would see them even entertaining that would be at pick 230. And that would be the last one that we have. I think that they got Jack Plummer too, who apparently they like a decent amount, right? And look, other people can feel the way they want to. I'm not the biggest Jack Plummer fan or proponent or believer. Yeah. But they like him enough. He's got the requisite size for a prototypical traditional pocket quarterback. And if Dave is the quarterback whisperer, maybe that's all he needs. Maybe he says, look, let's stash this guy on the practice squad. And Andy is still here in Charlotte. As long as Andy is here, we know we've got our backup. And maybe they could say, look, if Brady Cook is the Missouri quarterback, first of all, I think it's hilarious that Luther Burden saw his stock drop and plummet, and everyone said it was because of awful quarterback play. And now all of a sudden Brady Cook is being talked about as an NFL prospect. It's like, which one is it, man? Like, did he tank this 5-star recruit, or is he an NFL quarterback and Luther is the problem? Right. But I think that the Panthers would be wise to use every single draft pick on positions that are not quarterback, in my opinion.
I would agree. And I would also be surprised if they were to take another receiver in this draft, even though I think that late in the game there might be, unless it's maybe return specialist or something like that. Yeah. but I think we're going to see a lot of defensive line, linebacker, DBs. I do think they'll take another running back. Obviously, with Dowdle being on a 1-year deal, where he can opt out. With Brooks, the uncertainty there. So I could definitely see them take a running back. And this is a very, very deep running back draft. I mean, in the 4th, 5th round, you're looking at guys like Neal there's a plethora of them that could be taken. So I would not be surprised if they took a running back. And then tight end, something that we talked about earlier. The really good pass catching tight ends are probably going to be gone by the end of the 2nd round. Taylor looks like he's probably going to be out of there. The kid from Miami, a lot of people have him. So I think the pass catching tight ends will be gone before the 3rd round. Now, would one of those guys be there at 57? Possibly. I'd be shocked if we went offense in the first 2 rounds. Right. I just don't see that happening. But are there any tight ends that? And I know you mentioned having a good blocker, and adding a tight end that maybe isn't the great pass catcher, but is just a dog when it comes to blocking. Give us some names there that you would look for 4th, 5th, 6th round. Well, we don't have a 6th round pick, but 4th or 5th round that you kind of like that you think would fit the mold here.
Yeah, so the first name in this one that doesn't fit the mold of blocking, but the one that I think is worth bringing up, because you make it a good point of, I don't think the 2nd round is a viable option. I think they would be crazy to take a tight end in the 2nd.
I agree.
But Terrence Ferguson is the guy that they brought in for a 30 visit. That's the tight end out of Oregon. He's got the size that Dave Canales likes. He's got good catching ability. I don't think he's a premier athlete, but he could be a guy that maybe in round 3, if they're comfortable with what's left on the board and feel they could get what they need at a 111 and 114, maybe they do that like luxury type pick, if you will, of adding a Terrence Ferguson. But I do have a blocking tight end that I am extremely high on and I think fits perfectly here. And that's Jackson Hawes, the tight end out of Georgia Tech. 6'4.5", 252 pounds, good length. This guy wants to block. Like he is built to do it. It is like his modus operandi, right? That is his game. He showed a little bit more receiving ability as well at the Senior Bowl, actually. And the Panthers also have a history of really valuing guys that perform at the Senior Bowl.
No doubt.
To talk to Jim Nagy, who's now at Oklahoma, but he was the director and creator of the Senior Bowl. They value that a lot, and they really appreciated being able to go there and see these guys in person, talk to them. And so Jackson Hawes is a guy that had a terrific week for himself. Thomas Fadone II out of Nebraska is a guy that was a really high recruit, dealt with awful knee injuries 2022 and 23. Came back in 24, had a really nice showing playing for Nebraska. And Nebraska has this head coach, man, that's just not super duper competent. Panthers fans aren't really big fans of him. And he still put together a nice season at Nebraska. He's got really great length. He's a terrific move blocker. I think that you could move him kind of like what you see San Francisco do with George Kittle at times, out of, that like F back in behind in the backfield. You could have him as a inline. You could play him in the slot because he also has really good athleticism. And like I mentioned, I think it's over 34.5-inch arms, and he's 6'5", 245, 250 pounds. So those are a couple of guys in the late rounds I would look at. The Notre Dame tight end, Mitchell Evans, is also just a really all-around solid prospect, man. Talk about a traditional tight end. I think that guy is being undervalued a little bit.
So I'm a big Notre Dame fan, and you're right. That kid, he just kept coming and getting better and getting better. Notre Dame obviously is known for putting great tight ends out. Tremble, we mentioned him earlier. He has turned into at least a nice, serviceable tight end, and he's gotten better. But you're right. I think that kid, somebody's going to probably get 5th, 6th round, and he's got potential. And
he was coming off of an injury, right?
Exactly.
And so throughout the year, as he got further away from that injury, the better he looked. And that's encouraging too.
Yeah, and there's a couple other Notre Dame kids that are going to be hopefully around for us in the 2nd round tonight with Xavier Watson and Ben Morrison, the cornerback, that both make a lot of plays, man. So I think any of those 3 would be good fits for the Panthers. We talked about running backs, and obviously the Panthers are set this year with I think they're the only team in the NFL that have 2,000-yard rushers in the backfield. But it wouldn't surprise anybody if they were to take a running back. I don't think tonight. Give us some of those guys that you like that would be there maybe 3rd, 4th round.
Yeah. So they brought in Jarquez Hunter, the running back out of Auburn. He's a really intriguing prospect. He's a bit smaller than what they typically go for. He's about 5'9", 206 pounds. Good burst, man. Like great burst. That is the thing with him. He can get to his 2nd, 3rd gear in a hurry. He's a little bit of a power back despite the size. He doesn't shy away from contact. I think he's better in third down positions than you would think. I think he's a serviceable receiver. I would keep my eye on him. I think you could get him in the 4th or 5th round too. Just because of, like you talked about, the depth of this running back class, man, there's tremendous talent still on the board in the running back room. We also talked to RJ Harvey, the running back out of Central Florida. That's one of my favorite players. That is one of my personal favorites. Who's one of my draft crushes this year. This dude is so fun. Like, you talk about like a phone booth agility. This guy, man, you put him in close quarters and he just sneaks away from you. He is so shifty. He is so the change of direction ability that he shows is elite. Talk about production too, right? Because Dave Canales put an emphasis on touchdown scores, right? He said that multiple times in the offseason. RJ Harvey had over 20 touchdowns this year. He had 17 the year before, and then he had 10 the year before that. This guy is consistently in the end zone.
Yeah.
Give me that. And he's a good pass catcher. He's a really good run blocker. Now he's small again too, and he's older. I think he's 5'9", 205, and he's 24 years old. I'm not worried about the age personally when it comes to running backs.
Right.
Their shelf life isn't built for second contracts even.
No
right?
doubt.
Chuba Hubbard got a second contract, but he also wasn't a feature back for the first 2 years of his career.
Right. Yeah.
Normally when you put a lot of tread on the tires, you're not seeing a second contract from the team that drafts you. So I'm okay taking a risk on a little bit of an older guy if he has that explosive skill set that the Panthers need.
I agree. It's so funny how far analytics have come in all of sports, not just football. But, when we break down players, or you watch analysts break down players and they're talking about, the arms and this and that, it just trips me out because I know it has this play. I'm a huge baseball fan, and analytics have almost taken over the game of baseball. And I am a fan of it, and I understand it, but it is funny sometimes where you just got to sit back and put on the film and just go, you know what, this dude's a football. Mason Graham's a good example. You watch that kid on film, and there wasn't a more dominating defensive lineman than him. Okay. And then you hear people just knocking him because of his arm length and all these things. And I'm like, look, I get it. And I know that the prototypical guy's arm should be this long. And I know certain guys, GMs won't take a guy. I get all that. And I'm sure it obviously pans out more times than it doesn't, because they wouldn't put so much money in these analytic departments. But sometimes you just got to look at the film. And Mason Graham's a guy that, if he was sitting there for the Panthers last night, Canales kind of alluded to the fact that I think that might have been the guy they took if he was there. And the only guy that they would have taken, it sounded like, for the most part, other than McMillan. You see now I'm just calling him McMillan, so I don't say
It's a smart move, man. I might do the same, honestly. I liked it. I saw you did that earlier, and I was like, oh, he's got it, man.
Man, I just got to go to the last name. But yeah, analytics has come so far, and some of these teams, especially some of these young guys, like the guy in Jacksonville who, I forget how old he is, but he's the youngest GM in the NFL, kind of a quirky guy, but they say, very analytically driven. But it is amazing how far that's come. So when you mentioned a guy being 24, for instance, you nailed it. Running back shelf life, I want to say the average is 4 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So, so why? Who cares if he's 24? If you get 4 years out of him, you did well.
That's it. And it sounds like dismissive, right, from a team standpoint to like talk about a person that way. Yeah. But that's not saying that guy can't get a second contract. It's saying that you're not likely to get it with your team that drafted you because they know what they've put you through, right?
Right. And
that's why Chuba got it, is because we also know what he's still got in the tank. Like, we got ahead of things. We got ahead of the salary cap situation. We got ahead of the new increase that you're going to see in salaries from a positional standpoint when all of the salary cap increases. Yeah, and we just made a smart business move there. But we also had the inside track of knowing, hey, look, Chuba had 2 years that really weren't 2 years. Right. So, like, we're looking at this saying we give him a 2 or 3 year deal with a 2-year out. That's just an extension of his rookie contract, essentially.
No doubt. Yeah.
But then you see a guy like Josh Jacobs, right? He goes and he signs with another team for big money. And he's still playing really good football. But the Raiders weren't interested in investing that kind of money in another 4 years of that running back.
Yeah, that's what makes what Derrick Henry does just amazing, because that dude has been running the ball since he was 4 years old. Yep. And I'm sure you saw the interview with Nick Saban when he talked about when Derrick Henry was a freshman and they were practicing and Derrick Henry was just missing every block. He didn't know where to be, and Saban walks over to him and starts ripping him, and Henry looks at him and goes, "Coach, all I ever did in football is they turn around, they give me the ball and say, run. I never had to worry about pass protection, you know?
Yeah. And hey, look, it's working out for him now too in the NFL, right? Sam?
Man.
That's the only guy, to be honest, that when they were getting rid of him, when the Titans were getting rid of Derrick Henry, everyone was like, no, it makes sense, man. He's a running back. He's bigger. He's got a lot of tread on that tire. Nah, not for me. That was the only guy that I was like, what a mistake. Like, he's going to end up in a place. I thought to myself, well, he's going to end up in a place like Baltimore, and he's just going to have the best career that he could ever have. And look at what he's doing with the Ravens. Right?
It's been unbelievable. I mean, him and then, my Giants, when Barkley left, which I didn't have a problem with them letting him go because the Giants offensive line was not good. The team wasn't going anywhere. But he's another one that, even coming off of, bad knee injury and whatever, still just you look at him and you go, my God, he looks like he's 20 years old still,
Well,
and
it's what you're talking about with the analytics, right? You can't get so caught up, man, on the things that are on paper that you ignore the stuff that's on film.
Right.
And I use all of it, right? But it's like making a great dish at home. You've got ingredients to make that dish. I can't just leave salt out and expect this to taste like I want it to taste.
Right.
But I also just can't use salt only.
Right.
Nobody wants to eat just salt and beans, right? But if I have some herbs and I have some, broth and everything else, I can make you a really nice braised bean dish.
No doubt.
I can't do it with just salt.
So tonight, obviously right now the Panthers pick at 57. We'll see if they move up or down, add any picks. We'll see. But go ahead and give us your mock the rest of the way that if this draft goes the way that Ricky wants it to go, this is what we come away with tonight, or the rest of the draft.
Woo, okay,
and I kind of put you on the spot there.
No, that's okay. I like it, man. I perform well under pressure. I was a Kobe Bryant fan, so I look at it and I would anticipate a potential move up, but for the sake of this, I will not do a move up just to kind of keep it easy. At 57, I am hopeful that Princely Umanmielen might fall right into their lap. Princely is a guy that I think is more of a designated pass rusher, at least initially, because he's got some concerns in run support and defending the run is setting an edge. So I think that Princely could end up falling to 57. So I'll make that my pick there. At 74, I'm going to go Andrew Makuba, the safety out of Texas. I would love that pick because I also think that, well, man, now I'm sitting here thinking to myself that I might change that. I'm going to change it. Can I go on the fly here?
Absolutely.
I'm going to change that. I'm going to go Ashton Gelati at that third round pick. I'm going to double dip. I'm going to go Princely Umanmielen and Ashton Gelati. I'm going to shore up that position. Then I'm going to take Jonas Sanker, the safety out of Virginia. I'm going to take him with pick 111. At pick 114, that's where it starts getting like, I don't know how the board is going to fall.
Right.
But if it falls in a advantageous way for Carolina, Danny Stutzman, let's go Oklahoma linebacker. I think that would be a nice place for him. I think that he could be a nice depth piece that also can serve as a spot starter if needed. And we had injuries last year that we've got to be prepared for. So give me Danny Stutzman there. We got 3 in round 5. I try to think if I could rattle off 3 off the top of my head. How about Quincy Riley, the Louisville cornerback?
I like him.
I think that he could be on our board there. We talked a little bit about, you mentioned you don't think they go for another receiver unless it's like a special teams return guy, right? There's 2 that I'll say have a potential of being a pick here. And that's either Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech, who is explosive. He's about 5'10", 194 pounds. Terrific athletic ability. This guy ran like a 4.38, 41-inch vertical, almost 11-foot broad jump. He has return specialist experience, has kick returns for a touchdown, as a punt returns. I think that he could be a really nice rotational piece that you draw up manufactured touches for. But the other guy is a guy who I think mainly what I like about him, he's got an elite first name. Ricky White out of UNLV is a tremendous football player. He's got a good long wiry frame for a wide receiver. He's about 6'1.5", 194 pounds. Ran an awful 40 on the combine, and it turns out he was getting over an injury. So he ran it again at his pro day and shed nearly a whole tenth of a second off of his time. But what I love about him, he has 3 blocked punts or 4 blocked punts in his career. Wow. And he was also a volume receiver, had over 1,100 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns for UNLV as the focal point of their offense. But 4 blocked punts on special teams, 2 of them returned for a touchdown. So if you talk about a guy who could be that locker room guy, the character guy, and who also offers that core 4 ability to play special teams, I think that's Ricky White. And then I'll finish it with Jackson Hawes. How about that? The tight end out of Georgia Tech.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about a guy you just reminded me of, and I'm going to it's Tez Walker, the receiver from Oregon, or
Tez Johnson.
Tez Johnson. Sorry.
Yeah.
The guy's 160 pounds soaking wet. He's tiny guy, but he's fast and he's elusive. He's a guy too that I could see later on if they were going to take it. And I don't know how long I don't know if he'd be there in the 5th round, because I know a lot of teams do like him. I know Denver with Bo Nix basically being his best friend, but he's a guy that you could also see Canales drawing up some things for where he you get him the ball. He kind of gets lost behind some of these big guys and bam, he's gone.
I mean, look, they brought in Devin Tompkins last year, who was with Dave Canales at Tampa. Mm-hmm. Canales has also drafted guys at Seattle that were small, that were, explosive guys. So there's a real possibility that if he were to fall, I think what kind of muddies up his outlook here in Carolina, right, is that we did just allocate that 1st round pick to receiver, because I think you are kind of right about that range for him, man. I think that he's end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th. Only because of that physical size threshold that is going to scare some teams off. Yeah. And he didn't have a great 40 either. But you watch the tape, man, the dude is not slow. Anyone that thinks this guy is slow, that's crazy. He never would have made it to as well as he did and get as far as he did in college athletics, being a slow 5'8", 155-pound receiver, right?
Exactly. I mean, I agree with you. I think the kid was electric when I would watch Oregon play. Yep. And like I said, his whole story is pretty cool. He lived with Bo Nix and his family took him in. So I know Bo's going to be, yelling at Sean Payton to take him. So we'll see what happens with him. But all right. So you just got us through, I believe, the 5th round, the 3 picks in the 5th round. Who else you looking at?
So I got one in the 6th, right? Oh, man, one of the 6. I think that they might double dip at safety, to be honest, because they only have 2 safeties on the roster right now. Now, maybe in free agency they go and they sign a Julian Blackmon or something still, a guy who's still out there that could be your starter. And
they brought him in.
Rookie.
Yeah, they brought him in for a meeting. Yeah.
Right. They had a cup of coffee with him down there on Mid Street, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they do bring him in as the starter. Maybe it's even a 1-year deal. You see that happen a lot after drafts where some of these free agents kind of hold off and they're like, I want to see which teams still have holes left. So I know what my value is on the open market. So maybe he comes in, but if he doesn't, you're looking at needing at least 2 more safeties just for depth, right? Yeah. Forget the starter. Like you're talking about Damani Richardson needs somebody to play behind him. Right. So we've got Jonas Sanker. There are some guys that just have physical profiles that also translate really well to special teams contributors. I would look at Maxon Hook out of Toledo. I like him. Hunter Wohler out of Wisconsin is another guy. And then the last safety that I'll put in as a consideration is Keaton Crawford out of Nevada. If I had to pick one of those, and I think that one of them is there, I'll go Maxon Hook out of Toledo. I think that he could also serve as a decent depth piece that can develop a little bit. And I think that he'd be a great special teams player as well. Now, the one thing I didn't do, though, Smile Mondon Jr. out of Georgia, the linebacker, is by far one of the most athletic, best coverage linebackers. And I know I took Danny Stutzman earlier. I could also see them double tap and bring in Smile as a special teams gunner because he's going to cause havoc with his speed. But develop him, and he might be the steal linebacker of this NFL draft.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What? And with Franklin leaving, going to Denver,
that special teams ace, right?
No doubt. So I haven't really thought a lot about him. It's funny too. John Gruden on his show picked his sleeper of the draft to be what's the kid's name? The receiver out of Georgia.
Arian Smith.
Arian Smith, he's fast, but he drops way too many passes.
Drops the balls, man.
I mean, he drops the balls, but Gruden loves him. But, listen, it's worked for the Eagles. When in doubt, take a dude from Georgia.
That's it, man. And honestly, I hope they do add a Georgia Bulldog somewhere in there, right? And there are some guys that I would look at too. And I know that I just gave my draft, but if you want some more like just kind of like off the beaten path names for Georgia players, Warren Brinson, defensive tackle, we brought him in, talked to him. He showed some really good flashes. I think that he's a much better player in the pros than he was in college. And then Tyrion Ingram Dawkins is kind of this tweener edge interior defensive lineman, 6'5", 280, great length, 34-inch arms. I think that he's going to intrigue some teams in that 4th and 5th round range as well. So those are guys that I would have on my radar. One other player I'll give you too, because we talked about the trenches, right, on the defensive line. Joshua Farmer, the interior defensive lineman out of Florida State. This dude has 6'3", 315 pounds, stout, big build, really good pass rusher for that size. And I think that his 35.5-inch arms, I think, are going to draw somebody to him. And he has the ability that if you could use him as a rotational player and let him develop, that dude's got that game-wrecking ability, man. If he ends up at Philadelphia, I will be a sick person.
Or the Falcons, for that matter.
Or the Falcons, man. Please
please don't go to the Falcons. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I know you've got to run. I know it's your son's birthday today.
Yes, sir.
And like I said, I really do appreciate you filling in and love to have you back on, whether it be to help co-host or as a guest, talk football, talk the Panthers during the season. We're getting ready to go. When I ran the radio stations, I used to call it the nuclear summer, man. Like you get after the draft, and the NFL does a pretty good job of giving you something to touch about every month. But man, it gets pretty lonely after this draft, man. And it takes a while to get back to that first day of camp, which, by the way, we haven't talked about. What are your thoughts on?
Be there,
What are your thoughts on that? Because here's the thing with me. For years and years and years, when I ran WFNZ, I would always cut a deal to where we would broadcast live, and we had great shows, and the Panthers were always great, bringing whether it be Marty Herney or the players by, and it was a blast, and I know the fans loved it. I guess after doing that for so long now, I don't go to the camp much anymore. But I know a lot of people do love it. I was surprised, though, how that they just abandoned it completely. I can get them not going back to Wofford, but I was surprised that they didn't at least do 5 or 6 practices at the stadium or something. What were your thoughts on that?
I'm severely disappointed, to be completely honest, man. I think that it's a pretty big oversight for them to not acknowledge that that's one of the only opportunities for a lot of fans to be in person for some of these events, because the ticket prices, the cost of these ticket prices nowadays, I mean, you can't just say, I got money to blow, I'll go to a game. You better have a good amount of money to blow to sit up in the nosebleeds, right?
Yep.
I think that it's a shame that, and it's not some sort of thing where like, well, we didn't have enough time to figure out a contingency play. Sure you did, man. You knew that you were building these facilities. You knew that you were going to have a year. And if it's 2 years, you definitely knew that you needed a backup plan, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that there was a desire to make it available for fans. And that sucks. And maybe I'm wrong about that. I hope I'm wrong about it. But the way that it reads is that we don't really care if this is disappointing. We are not going to allocate more funds into a temporary solution. I think if he were to go back to Wofford, Tepper would have to admit a little bit of pride got in the way of moving them out of Wofford, and maybe having a little disdain for the revere that the previous owner was held in with Wofford and not him, right? But I'm with you 1,000%. Why not 7-8 open practices in Bank of America Stadium, right? You've got this turf that's supposed to be so easy to move in and out. You won't put grass in. Can't we just play after the Taylor Swift concerts and the Kendrick Lamar concerts?
Well, it's funny. First of all, would be a great time for Tepper to actually show that he does listen to the fans, because there's no way that the criticism has not got back in that building. And to add 5, 6, 7 practices that can be done in a flip of a switch. It's not like, I do events, I do concerts, I do festivals. I'm telling you, that can be done fairly easily. And the grass thing you bring up, which is funny. I was at the Charlotte FC game last week, and the seats that we had were in the section they call the vault, which I had not been in, but it's on the 50-yard line. You're down on the field. And so I'm walking around on that turf, and I'm, kicking it around, and, and it seemed, I'm at I played soccer in college. I hated playing on turf. Turf's come a long way, obviously, since I was in college. But still, while I was on that field, I was thinking to myself, gosh, how much nicer would this be? Forget from a health, obviously, it's better for the players. But I'm still surprised that he hasn't pulled the trigger on that. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's the whole thing about the cost of having to put in sod every single time. But this guy's worth $20 billion, right?
Exactly.
Like, you would think at some point, and I'm glad you said it, but like you would think at some point that when these opportunities present themselves right there in front of him for an easy win for him, take it, man. I do think that this is a very calculated way that they rolled all this out with training camp the day before the first round of the draft. And then also hinting at having, the beat reporters starting to throw out these little sneak hints about Cam Newton and the relationship mending there with the Panthers. It's all very calculated, and that feels nasty to me too, because it's like, hey, these simpletons will forget about the fact that we're not going to let them go to training camp for 2 years if we just let Cam Newton pound the drum at a home game.
Yeah, it's the oldest trick in the book. I was actually surprised that they didn't wait and do it today when everyone's going to be talking about the actual pick. I think they even messed that up. I think they could have waited
Hell,
a
they
little
could have
longer.
just had T-Mac announce it himself, right? With the first pick, here's T-Mac. T-Mac, what do you have to say about the Panthers? Well, first, I hate that we're not going to see you in training camp for 2 years, but I'm really excited to get to work.
Yeah, no doubt. And listen, and everyone is excited about the Cam deal. I mean, Cam to me to this day is the toughest quarterback I've ever seen play the game. Sure. You talk about playing with heart and loyalty, and I'm sure on his show he'll be talking about what he thinks about McMillan as a receiver. No. I know Steve Smith, who's a good buddy of mine, and I know he wasn't too happy. He wasn't the biggest McMillan fan, but and Steve has nailed some receivers like Jalen Coker, and he's missed on a few like Mingo, but just as every other analyst has. 100%. But it'll be interesting to talk to him and just see exactly why he is not so high on him, and maybe he'll grow on him. Who knows? But thanks again for joining me, man. And before you leave, tell everybody where they can follow you, about your podcast, on Twitter, all those things.
Well, the beautiful part is that if you're watching, I have this gaudy sign right above my head. It's at Ricky Bo Body. That's where you can find me on Twitter. That's where you'll see most of my work posted. I am also a co-host of the Panthers on Tap show. If you want to subscribe to that, we do a lot of stuff with beat reporters will come on. We'll have national reporters come on. We do a lot of stuff just ourselves. It's me and my co-host Curtis and Bryson. And then I also do the draft show with Edgar Salmingo Jr., who I created the Carolina draft guide with, which, by the way, go and check that out if you haven't. And I'm not saying that just to like toot my own horn, but there's a lot of information in there, historical data about the Panthers that will kind of give you some insights, schematic breakdowns of the offense and defense. It'll just make things a little bit more comprehensive for you while we're watching the rest of this draft this weekend. So those are all the places you can find me. And thank you very much, man, for having me on today. And if you could pry Frank off the golf course, and you want me to come back so that he can kind of give me some feedback as well about my deep dives into analysis on prospects, I'm all for it, man. You just let me know.
Well, we will, and Frank loves to argue. So once the draft, when the draft's over, we'll get you on the next couple of weeks, because I'm sure he'll be picking some of these parts or some of these picks apart. Argument. Oh well, Frank does too. So Frank, people see Frank and I go at it, and it's natural, whether it was when we're watching a football game or on the show, and people get nervous and scared. They think we're getting ready to fight. and then, we go to break and everything's fine. It's just the way we are. And Frank loves to argue, but thanks again, man. We'll everybody, seriously, he's not kidding about that draft guide, especially with 8 picks left in the draft. You want to know who these guys are. And you heard Ricky mention a lot of the guys to keep an eye out for, but this draft guide, it's like 250 pages, if I'm not mistaken, right?
276 pages. Yes,
wow. Sir. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I was going to print it out, and I was out of paper. I had like 100 pieces of paper left. So I just pulled it up on my iPad and followed it on the iPad. But it really is something that, if you get a chance, go follow Ricky and download it. It's free right there. It's easy. You download it and you'll have all the info you need for the draft. But thanks again. Happy birthday to your son. And we'll have you on in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Everyone else, we'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend. You got NBA, you've got baseball, which I know I'm the biggest fan of. Not many of you love baseball as much as I do. NASCAR's back this weekend, and we'll talk all of it. But mainly on Monday, we'll be talking Panthers draft and see what they end up with. Have a good weekend.